1973. There were 6 full-time music faculty, and I believe there are 11 full-time faculty now. So one of the biggest things about thinking about spending 42 years here is how much growth has taken place over those years. The number of students enrolled in music programs has also increased. And if you look at the big university as a whole, the enrollments have gone up dramatically, and there's new programs and new buildings. In fact, I did a little mental tally and came up with the fact that there were 6 buildings on the campus when I started. There's at least 14 or 15 now, so something like that. So a lot of growth has taken place. There was no business or management degree program. There was no communications program when I started, but those things have come along and added hugely to the growth of the entire university. Here, that Webster University was Webster College, and it was a Catholic school for girls. And it was maybe a little less than a decade before I started that the first men were starting to be introduced, and the ties to the Catholic Church were formally severed, and the curriculum was changed and overhauled very dramatically. So major changes took place at this school right before I arrived. And one interesting memory is that 2 of my first composition students happened to be 2 of the first members of the first men's class at Webster University. So that is a very dramatic transition that's taken place over time. About 1978, somewhere around there, Dr. Stallings and I installed the first electronic music studio at the department here. That was a classical studio, a classical electronic studio as it was called. And we had a Moog synthesizer of early vintage sitting in the studio. Well, that studio doesn't exist as the way it did before. In fact, my office today is the former electronic music studio, and I get a kick out of coming into my office every day and sitting where the Moog used to sit. It brings back some interesting memories. When I think about some of the things that I'm likely to miss, and that I know I will miss after I retire, one thing I would say is that this department is a pretty tight family in many ways, and many of us have known each other for many years. And so I will definitely miss coming to school every day and seeing friends and colleagues that I know very well. So it's also a fact that I will miss going to work in what is a grand, beautiful old house with a lot of history wrapped up in it. Rumor has it that Eleanor Roosevelt spent a night in this house as a guest. So it's a building with a lot of character, and I will miss getting to work in this particular environment. I will also miss interacting with students. Coming to work really was not always work. It was a chance to talk to students and find out what's important in their lives, to have some impact in the direction they might take in the future, and just to feel good about that interaction. And I'll tell you, there's a whole lot to be learned from listening to each other, whether it's listening to your colleagues or your friends or your students. Every day is a learning experience. And what do I look forward to after I retire? I've got a lot of jokes about what I'm going to do, and none of them are true, except that I'm probably going to relax a little bit more in some ways. But what do I look forward to? And I look forward to specifically having more time to compose music. I've always loved composing. That's a big part of my life. One of the reasons I'm here is to teach composition. But this will afford me the opportunity to actually take more time to write the music that I want to write. People like to ask you when you're retiring if you plan to travel. Well, I have no specific plans to travel, but it sure would be nice to go certain places that I have marked on the map that I would like to go someday that I've never been. So travel will happen whenever it happens, and it'll be a great thing to do. So, what would I like to tell students? Somebody said, do you have any wisdom that you'd like to share with students? So I don't know if there's wisdom to share with students, because usually the best wisdom in the world is to listen to what somebody else has told you. And so listening to students has been a wise thing for me to do. But I'll take a stab at what I'd like to share with students as I walk out the door. And one of those things is to trust yourself, be good to yourself, and be good to others. And I'd say that's probably number one. No matter what you do with your life, trust yourself, be good to yourself, and be good to others. If opportunity knocks on your door and you have a chance to do something you never even thought you might do, if you think you can do what you're being asked to do, then by all means say yes. Even if it isn't the next best thing for you to do in your life, just try it. You never know until you try something. So if something comes along and you think, I bet I could do that, well then go for it. Just take a chance and see what happens. What would I like to say to my colleagues as I walk out the door? Thanks for the ride. It's been great. Really, I work with some of the most talented, brightest people I could ever imagine working with. I have learned so much from all the different gifts that are shared in this building and on this campus. So I think if I have anything I'd like to say to them is just don't change what you're doing. Just keep teaching each other and keep learning from each other. And I think that's something that my colleagues do well here, is that we do listen carefully and critically to each other. We pay attention, and if we have something to share, we're open about sharing it, and we learn constantly from that experience. So there's an old quote about practice makes perfect, and I agree that it's important to try and achieve perfection, but it's also important to know that perfection is always just around the corner, and we never quite become perfect. But I'd like to modify that quote a little bit in a way that a good friend of mine taught me to think about that quote, and that is to think of practice makes progress rather than practice makes perfect. Because you may not be perfect, but there's always room to grow, and there's always a chance to progress with whatever you're working on.